In the hush of twilight, the skies above Asgard held a strange silence. No rumble of thunder, no flash of Mjölnir across the heavens. Only the cold breath of stillness, whispering through the halls of the gods. Thor stood upon the edge of Bifrost, his broad shoulders cloaked in fur, his eyes scanning the gray skies. He clenched his fists. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. The storm that lived inside him found no echo in the clouds. In the great hall of Asgard, the gods had noticed too. Odin's single eye narrowed, Freya's falcon feathers bristled. Heimdall, guardian of the rainbow bridge, gripped his horn with unease. Mjölnir was missing, and without it, the world below was vulnerable. Mountains would tremble, but not from thunder. Giants would stir, sensing weakness in the realm of the gods. In the hush of evening, Thor turned to the one being who always seemed to know more than he should. "Loki," he said, voice low and heavy, "find out who has taken my hammer, before night falls forever." The winds in Asgard no longer laughed. They once sang through the gold-veined halls like choirs of the sky, weaving between the ivory columns, playing in the braids of the goddesses, and stirring the silver goblets on feast tables. But now, those winds had changed. They crept instead, soft and eerie, like forgotten ghosts brushing across empty corridors, stirring only dust and memory. Thor had not spoken since Mjölnir vanished. He stood each morning at the same high balcony where the rainbow bridge touched the sky, his breath fogging in the crisp air, watching clouds that refused to roll or speak. His chest, where storms once gathered, was still. The thunder that once echoed in his bones had gone silent. Within the great hall of Gladsheim, Odin's ravens circled above the rafters, unsettled. The Allfather sat unmoving, his one eye fixed on a crackling fire that offered no warmth. He had not summoned counsel. No words had passed his lips in days, but all of Asgard could feel it. The tension in the branches of Yggdrasil, the tremble in the song of the cosmos. Freya had taken to pacing. Her falcon feather cloak trailed behind her like flowing ink in water. She watched the skies. She whispered to her birds. They did not answer. The gods, for all their power, had become listeners, and what they heard in the wind was not the song of passing time. It was the whisper of imbalance, of something stolen from the sacred weave. Even the servants walked slower now. Footsteps once light with divine confidence now tread as though the marble might crack beneath them. The air was too thick, the halls too quiet. The very light seemed dimmer, as though Asgard itself was holding its breath. In this quiet unraveling, one figure moved unlike the rest. He did not hesitate. He did not fear the silence. He wore it. Loki moved like oil over still water, graceful, smooth, and impossible to grasp. He passed beneath the great archways with a half-smile that neither comforted nor threatened. Some called it charm, others danger. But Loki, son of Laufey, had not come to jest. He paused beneath a tall window where the wind whispered against the ancient glass. His eyes narrowed. There was something in the air, something beyond absence. A pattern had been disrupted, and where patterns faltered, chaos found purchase. Heimdall from his high watchtower had seen nothing cross the Bifrost. No fire giant, no frostborn beast, no soul foreign to the gods. Yet the hammer was gone, and the absence of it was like a hole in the sky itself. It was not just a weapon. Mjölnir was balance. Mjölnir was law. Mjölnir was the sound of order striking against the bones of chaos. Without it, thunder slept, and with it, the world began to forget that storms were ever a warning. That night, no feasts were held, no horns were raised, no songs were sung beneath the vaulted dome of Valaskjalf. Even the stars, as seen from the observatory, seemed to hold back their shimmer. Something sacred had been taken, and though no one yet knew by whom or why, every god felt it, in their bones, in their breath, in their dreams. And so they waited, while wind whispered through the halls of Asgard like a song no one remembered how to finish. The decision was made in silence. There were no horns, no declarations, no echoing speeches under the dome of the gods. Only Odin's low voice breaking the stillness. Loki, go. And so the trickster prepared. He did not argue. He did not delay. He simply nodded with that same half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. The gods watched as he approached the edge of the high balcony, the wind catching in his cloak, the golden threads of his garments shivering like leaves. He stepped up to the ledge, then closed his eyes. In an instant he changed. Feathers rippled over his skin, arms shrank, legs faded, wings unfurled, wide, dark, glistening like the edge of a dagger, and in one smooth motion, Loki leapt into the air. The falcon soared into the northern sky. The clouds parted before him. Below, Asgard began to fade, its towers shrinking, its lights dimming, swallowed by mist. Above him, the stars watched silently. His path was a narrow thread through shadow. Jotunheim was not far in miles, but in spirit it lay a world away. The winds grew colder, the air thicker. The shimmer of magic around Asgard faded, replaced by a deep, bone-quiet silence. No birds sang here, no trees whispered. Below, the land was sharp and jagged, cliffs like broken teeth, ice flows like frozen rivers of time, jagged peaks stabbing upward, trying to reach the sky. This was a world without softness. Even the moonlight seemed brittle here. Loki flew lower, the air tightening like a fist around him. He passed above mountains whose names had been forgotten by the gods. Ruins of temples lost to time peeked through the snow. He flew over beasts sleeping in ice, their breath slow and ancient. He did not shiver. He did not falter. Loki was not welcome here, but he belonged here, in some strange, unspoken way. And Jotunheim recognized him. The clouds grew heavy, gray and blue like bruises. A distant rumble echoed, not thunder, but something older. The ground below creaked as if remembering footsteps from long ago. Finally, in the distance, a fortress rose from the mountain stone like a wound torn into the world. Black towers, fireless torches, walls that drank in the moonlight. Thrym's Hall. Loki circled once above it, then descended slowly, wings folding into nothing. He landed in silence, in the form of a man again, though his eyes still shimmered with feathered shadows. Two frost giants guarded the gate, tall as pine trees, their faces rough as rock. Loki did not hesitate. He smiled, raised one hand in greeting, and said in a voice smoother than ice, "Tell your master the gods send a message, wrapped in feathers and flame." Thrym's Hall was not built for warmth. It was carved into the bones of a mountain. Stone walls slick with frozen mist, ceilings so high that even echoes dared not rise. The torches there did not burn with flame, but with a dull, cold blue glow, like fire that had forgotten how to feel. Loki walked alone down the central passage. His boots made no sound on the stone. His cloak whispered behind him like a secret. As he moved, his reflection danced in the polished ice along the walls, many Lokis walking in step, each one wearing a different smile. The giants watched from the shadows. They did not speak. They did not move. Eyes like ice, breath like smoke, they loomed with the stillness of old statues. At the far end of the hall sat Thrym, king of the frost giants. He did not rise. He sat on a throne made of black stone, furred and crowned in antlers. His fingers curled around a scepter carved from a frozen root. His voice, when it came, was low and grinding, like glaciers dragging across bedrock. Loki, flame-born, half-blood, godwalker, you come, empty-handed? Loki bowed with practiced elegance. Empty-handed, he said, voice as smooth as melted gold. No, great Thrym, I bring something far more delicate. I bring attention. Thrym raised an eyebrow, a massive snowy ridge lifting above a glacial eye. And why, the king rumbled, should the attention of a god matter to me? Loki smiled, not broadly, just enough. Because, he said, the gods are listening now, and when gods listen, they worry, and when they worry, they act. The silence that followed was long and ancient. The hall itself seemed to lean in. Thrym stood, the very stones groaned beneath his weight. He stepped down from his throne, each step echoing like the fall of a mountain. He walked slowly toward Loki, the air around him cracking with cold. Closer now, Loki looked into Thrym's face, a mask of stone and winter, but not without thought. This was no brute. This was an old creature, a patient one. You want your hammer, Thrym said simply. No, Loki replied. Thor wants it. Odin wants it. Midgard needs it. I, personally, enjoy the chaos. Thrym almost smiled. He turned and began to pace, his heavy feet sending low tremors through the floor. When I took Mjölnir, he said, I expected rage, a storm, fire, but instead, silence. Silence and whispers and you. Loki tilted his head. Should I be flattered? Thrym stopped. I want Freya. The words were not loud, but they filled the entire hall as if spoken by the mountain itself. Loki said nothing at first. He looked down, then up again. Eyes unreadable. Freya does not wish to marry. Thrym chuckled, deep and sharp. She will, or you will not see your thunder again. Loki's smile faded, just a little, but his voice remained calm. I will take your offer to the gods, but I warn you, Thrym, this silence you enjoy. It is a pause, not peace. Thrym returned to his throne like a boulder rolling back to its resting place. I welcome thunder, he said. Let it come. Loki turned without another word. He left through the same hall, the same dancing reflections following him, though this time their smiles were narrower, colder. Outside, the wind howled across the frost, and far above, the sky held its breath. As the wind returned to Asgard, so did Loki. He did not fly. He did not shimmer into being. He simply walked, cloak dusted with frost, eyes unreadable, face calm as stone. The gods gathered quickly. Thor was the first to speak. He did not wait for riddles or introductions. Where is it? He asked, voice echoing across the high stone chamber like distant thunder. Where is Mjölnir? Loki paused only a moment, then said the words as if they were nothing more than a riddle at a feast. Thrym has it. The room tensed, even the air seemed to draw back. What does he want in return? Odin asked, his voice grave and still. Loki looked to Freya. Her eyes narrowed even before he answered. He wants her. Silence. Freya rose from her seat like a wave preparing to strike. Her necklace Brisingamen glittered with fury, and her voice rang out like ice snapping in a frozen river. I will not be bartered like cattle, she shouted. No one dared answer. She left the hall in a storm of silks and feathers. It was then that Heimdall, guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, stepped forward. He said no clever thing, no poetic verse, only this: let Thor go in her place. The chamber held its breath, and then laughter. Loki collapsed into his seat, howling. Even Odin's mouth twitched. But Thor did not laugh. His eyes flared, his fists clenched, and yet the silence that followed grew longer and heavier. Heimdall did not smile. He merely added, dress him in Freya's bridal cloak, braid his hair, cover his beard with a veil, let Loki be his handmaid. The laughter stopped, because slowly, like light dawning behind a cloud, the gods realized it might work. Thor's rage flickered. He opened his mouth to protest, but then closed it again. His honor battled his reason. His pride clashed with the need to reclaim the thunder. Loki stood, brushing off his tunic. Come then, he said. Let's play dress-up. And so the hall that once bore armor and blades now became a chamber of cloth. Golden robes were laid out, necklaces of pearl and topaz. Freya's bridal veil, spun from moonlight and spider silk, was placed upon Thor's head. His beard bristled beneath it. He sat still as goddesses combed and braided his red-gold hair, their faces trembling between amusement and awe. Loki, meanwhile, donned the pale linen of a handmaid. He smirked at every step, humming as he fastened ribbons and tied sashes. You make a stunning bride, he said, adjusting Thor's veil. Truly, the hammer will weep at the sight of you. Thor growled, but he did not move. Outside, the chariot waited. Goats stamped impatiently, lightning flickering in their horns. Thor stood. He was no longer the god of storms. He was something else now, something both more and less. He was the bride. And Loki, his mocking shadow, followed close behind. Together they set off, toward Thrym's hall, where truth waited in disguise, and thunder wore a veil. The sky was pale when they departed. A thin mist clung to the roots of Bifrost, winding through the air like memory. The bridge itself shimmered with reluctant color, as though unsure if it should celebrate or mourn. Thor stepped into the chariot first. He wore the gown, the veil, the golden ribbons. Beneath the silk his arms were stone, beneath the lace his breath burned. Loki followed, still humming. He climbed beside the thunder god with the lightness of a shadow, dressed in handmaid's linen and amusement. He did not speak, but his eyes glittered with all the things left unsaid. The goats stamped and pulled, tooth gnasher and tooth grinder, beasts of storm and spark, snorted silver mist and launched into the sky. Their hooves clattered against the arc of the Rainbow Bridge. Behind them, Asgard faded into clouds and myth. Ahead, Jotunheim waited, cold, jagged, and listening. The journey was long and slow. The air grew thinner. The wind howled like a forgotten prayer. Below them, mountains crept by like sleeping giants. Rivers curled through canyons like silver veins. The sun, shy and pale, hovered low, unwilling to follow them too far. Thor said nothing. He sat tall, hands folded beneath embroidered sleeves, veil pressed against his beard. The fire within him trembled against the soft fabric of his disguise. He was a storm wrapped in moonlight. Loki, on the other hand, did not stop moving. He adjusted Thor's veil, smoothed the folds of silk, whispered jokes into the wind that only he could hear. But every so often his smile faltered. He too felt it. The silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence before the fall. They passed ruins long forgotten, pillars carved by hands older than gods, statues whose faces had long since melted into stone. The past hung heavy in the air like mist that would not lift. They flew over valleys that held no echo, forests that never moved, rivers that had never known warmth, and then, in the far distance, Thrym's mountain, a black shape on the horizon, like a blade stabbed into the sky. The chariot began to descend. The wind pulled at their cloaks, tugged at their silence. Loki leaned closer to Thor and whispered, "Are you ready, Bride of Thunder?" Thor did not answer. His jaw was set, his eyes burned behind the veil. The chariot landed in snow. No sound greeted them, no drums, no music, only the vast open stillness of Jotunheim. And there, at the gate of the great hall, stood Thrym, massive, still, waiting. Behind him, frost giants gathered in rows, dressed in armor carved from glacier stone, crowned in icicles, faces as old as winter. Loki stepped down first. He bowed low, arms extended, voice sweet as honey turned cold. "Mighty Thrym, we bring you what you asked for, the bride and her maid." Thor remained still. The veil fluttered in the cold. The silk caught the pale light. The goddess of love, impersonated by thunder. Thrym smiled, and the sky above them rumbled, not with storm, but with laughter. The gates of Thrym's hall creaked open like the jaw of an ancient beast. Inside, fireless torches flickered with ghostly light. The stone floor gleamed with ice. Shadows clung to the walls like old secrets, and the air smelled of smoke and stone, and something colder than winter. A long feast table stretched through the center of the hall, laden with slabs of roasted meat, steaming cauldrons, golden goblets, and piles of bread still warm from fireless ovens. At the far end sat Thrym, crowned and cloaked, his antlers gleaming like frozen branches. He rose, with arms outstretched, he welcomed the bride. "Come," he said, his voice booming through the frost. "Come, radiant Freya, my hall has waited for you." Thor stepped forward, veiled and glittering. The bridal gown shimmered in the dim light. The necklace of moonstone rested on his chest like a prayer. Each step he took was steady, but heavy. The god beneath the silk barely held in the thunder. Loki followed, smiling like a snake with a secret. The hall was filled with giants, broad-shouldered and bone-white, watching with icy interest. Some raised their goblets, others whispered, a few squinted. As Thor sat beside Thrym at the head of the table, the feast began. Food was passed down the line, ale was poured. Roasted oxen, boiled elk, slabs of honeyed pork, and barrels of mead arrived in waves. And Thor, who had not eaten all day, ate. He devoured 8 whole oxen, tore through a mountain of bread, drank 3 barrels of mead without pause, and cracked a roasted goat leg in his bare hands with a sound like breaking thunder. The hall fell quiet. One of the frost giants leaned toward Thrym and muttered, "Is this truly Freya?" Thrym, frowning, turned toward the veiled bride. Even through the silk, he could see the fire in those eyes. He whispered, "Why does she eat like a starving bear?" Before Thrym could question further, Loki stepped in. He bowed dramatically, hands fluttering like wings. "My lord," he said, "Freya has fasted for 8 days in her eagerness to see you. She refused all food and drink in her joy. Her hunger tonight is love's hunger." Thrym blinked, then grinned. Yes. Yes, of course. Passion. More food came. Thor drank more mead. He cracked another ox rib. His eyes burned brighter. Thrym leaned closer to kiss his bride, but as he neared, he paused. Why? He whispered. Are her eyes so fierce, like lightning in a storm? Loki again appeared at his elbow. Love, he said, can spark a storm in any heart. Thrym, charmed and confused, leaned back. The hall roared with laughter. Toasts were raised. Drums began to sound in the background like distant thunderclouds. But under the veil, Thor's hands were clenched, and in the shadows Mjölnir waited, still unseen, still out of reach, but close. So very close. As the feast roared on, so did the questions. The frost giants sang and drank. They pounded tables, bit into bones, and laughed like thunder cracking across glaciers. But not everyone laughed. She watched from the far end of the hall, tall, cold, crowned in sharp silver, Thrym's sister. Her name had long been lost to time, but her eyes, gray as crushed ice, missed nothing. She studied the bride. Too tall, too broad at the shoulder. That posture was not a goddess's. She narrowed her eyes. She watched as Freya lifted a roasted leg of ox in one hand. She tilted her head as the bride tore it in two without even flinching. Then came the mead, thick and sweet. The bride drank straight from the barrel. She leaned closer to Thrym and hissed, "That is no goddess, that is a beast in lace." Thrym blinked, half drunk on meat and illusion. "She's eager," he said. "She loves me." But his sister was not fooled. She stood. Her silver circlet glinted in the dim firelight as she strode down the hall, her cloak whispering across the icy floor. All eyes turned to her as she approached the head of the table. She stopped in front of the bride. Thor tensed beneath the veil. The hall fell silent again. "Sister of mine," she said, "let me greet you. Properly." Before anyone could stop her, she reached forward and lifted the veil. Gasps rippled across the room like wind over frozen water. There he was, Thor, red beard, fury burning in his eyes like the heart of a storm. But before Thrym could speak, before the hall could scream, Loki jumped between them, his arms opened wide, his voice rising in perfect theatrical panic. "No!" he cried. She hides her face from joy, from longing. She vowed not to reveal herself until the wedding rites were spoken. It's a vow, a sacred bridal vow. He turned to Thrym, eyes wide and shimmering. "Your sister," he said, "has ruined the moment." Thrym's face twisted, confused, angry, still under the spell of hope. He turned to his sister. "You insult my bride." She stared at Thor, then at Loki, then back again, and slowly she bowed, not out of respect, but out of fear. Because behind Loki, Thor's hands had found Mjölnir, still hidden beneath the feast table, still heavy with waiting. The storm was waking. There was no trumpet, no roar, no cracking sky, only silence. And in that silence, beneath the feast table carved from ancient pine, something stirred, a warmth, a hum, a presence old as the stars themselves. Mjölnir, the hammer, the heart of storms, the weight of oaths. It slid quietly into Thor's waiting hands, as if it had never left, as if it had been there all along, merely sleeping beneath the mask. The veil still hung over his face. The gown still shimmered on his shoulders, but everything had changed, because now Thor was whole. He stood slowly, not with rage, not with violence, but with a stillness that made even the frost giants pause. His veil slipped, not torn, not ripped, just unreleased, and as it fell, his eyes were revealed. They did not blaze, they did not burn, they shimmered, with sorrow, with understanding, with the quiet thunder of someone who knows exactly who he is. The hall held its breath. The frost giants, who had laughed, who had clinked goblets, who had sung of conquest, now said nothing. Thrym stared, not with anger, but with awe, and something like fear, because Thor had not struck, not yet. He simply held the hammer at his side, its surface pulsing gently, like a heartbeat of the world itself. Loki stepped back. Even he said nothing. In that moment, the gods and giants stood equal, not in power, but in presence. Time itself seemed to still, and then, not with fury, but with calm, Thor raised Mjölnir, not to destroy, but to end the lie. The illusion broke like morning-breaking mist. The hall flickered, the frost thinned. Reality returned, and it was quiet. Not a single scream was heard, only the soft sigh of wind through ancient stone. The veil was gone, the silence still lingered, but within that silence something ancient stirred, not in the hall, but within Thor. He no longer wore the gown. He no longer played the part. He was himself, but more than himself, as if the journey had stripped him bare and forged him anew. The frost giants stepped back. They did not scream. They did not charge. They simply trembled. And then Mjölnir rose, slowly, solemnly, as if pulled by the weight of memory. There was no sound, but the hall darkened as if a storm had arrived, without wind, without rain, without noise. Only light, soft and golden, began to pulse from Thor's hammer. It lit the hall like sunrise behind clouds, and in that strange glow the frost giants seemed to blur. Their shapes faded, their armor softened, their weapons dropped, like shadows melting in the dawn. Thor stepped forward, not fast, not violent, like a dream walking through another dream, with each step a heartbeat, with each breath a gust of silent thunder. He did not swing the hammer, he did not roar. Mjölnir simply moved, and wherever it passed, frost cracked, illusion crumbled. Not one scream, not one clash, only echoes, soft and endless, like waves on a forgotten shore. Thrym reached for his crown, but his hand passed through it. He looked down, and his body was made of mist. His throne melted, his hall sighed, and the feast faded like smoke. This was not death, it was release, as if Thor's storm had not destroyed, but awakened the truth hidden beneath the lie. And when it was over, when the giants were nothing more than memory, Thor stood alone. Loki watched from afar. No words, no laughter, only the crackle of quiet lightning, and the slow breath of the god who had become himself again. The hall was gone, the throne had vanished, the frost melted back into the earth, and Thor stood beneath an open sky, gray, vast, whispering with winds that remembered the old world. Mjölnir rested gently in his hand, not heavy, not pulsing, just home. Beside him Loki walked in silence, for once without a smirk, without a jest, only breath and boots on ancient snow. They did not speak of what had happened. There were no words for illusions undone, for gods wearing gowns, for shadows that had passed like dreams before dawn. but the wind carried it all, as if the world itself had watched and now exhaled. Ahead, the Bifrost shimmered, not bright, not wild, but steady. Like a promise kept, Heimdall stood at its base, not with sword raised, but arms lowered. He did not question. He did not ask. He only bowed. Not to Thor, not to Loki, but to the path they had walked, and the truth they had carried back. Thor stepped onto the bridge. Mjölnir hummed, a sound like thunder. But not in the sky. It was a sound that came from within, the sound of a god, remembering who he was and who he had never stopped being. Asgard welcomed him not with horns, but with quiet eyes, and torches lit not for celebration, but for reflection. Frigg met them in the golden courtyard. She touched Thor's shoulder, said nothing, then turned to Loki, and for a moment, he did not look away. He nodded. A real one. Small, almost invisible, but it was there. And so they returned, not as heroes, but as stories carried by the wind, written in thunder, and remembered by the stars. That night Asgard slept deeply, and Mjölnir rested, beside the hearth, silent, but ready. Above the quiet land the stars had begun to whisper, not loudly, not even clearly, but like old songs, sung to sleeping skies. Thor stood once more on Asgard's high balcony, the night breeze brushing his face, like the veil that had once hid it. He no longer wore the mask, but its memory lived in the wind. Mjölnir lay beside the hearth, still, silent, not forgotten, only resting. In the heavens above, a single star flickered more brightly than the rest. It pulsed slowly, not with fire, but with remembrance. Some say it was the eye of fate. Some say it was the last tear of a dev, who had once laughed too loudly. But Thor said nothing. He only looked up. The night remembered. It remembered the hall of giants, the gown, the laughter, the silence, the storm that did not roar, but rose like a breath held too long. Somewhere in the fields beyond the city, children asked their elders, was it true? Did Thor really wear a bridal dress to take back his hammer? And the elders smiled, not to mock, not to doubt, but because they too had once heard the tale. Under firelight, with warm honeyed milk, and stars blinking like old gods above, the story had lived, not because of war, not because of vengeance, but because it made even thunder feel gentle, because it wrapped strength in laughter, because it showed that gods, too, must sometimes wear masks to find who they are beneath. And so the tale drifted upward, like smoke from the last log on the fire, curling into the dark, twisting among the constellations until it found its place among the stars. And the star above Asgard, the one that pulsed with slow light, shimmered one final time, not to end the tale, but to sleep beside it.